Already, the power of the Sanctum returns to me. Your days of plundering its secrets end today!
Welcome to MojoPlays, and even though the PS5 is barely into the middle of its life cycle, there are still plenty of games that have somehow managed to go almost completely overlooked by most gamers.
You've got the money, we've got the power. So let's talk.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. Rise of the Ronin.
Those who cleave to the past, those who embrace the new, and the Ronin, a warrior free of all masters and bonds.
Upon its first reveal, many wrote Rise of the Ronin off as the Ghost of Tsushima clone. But in truth, the game has much more in common with Assassin's Creed than Sucker Punch's masterpiece. Set during the early 1900s in Japan, players are given a massive open world to explore, and their choices can affect the outcome of the narrative and their relationships with the many real-life historical figures they meet. The game's combat is where the game truly shines, offering players various weapons to suit their playstyle and a plethora of satisfying finishing moves. The game does suffer from the traditional Ubisoft formula with an excess of map icons, but the world itself is fun to explore, full of very traversal mechanics. Assassin's Creed fans who have been longing for the series to finally go to Japan, or those anxiously awaiting the next Ghost game from Sucker Punch, shouldn't ignore Rise of the Ronin.
Frankly, need all the help we can get. I'm going to need you on our side.
Marvel's Midnight Suns. We'll be the first to admit we were a little skeptical about this one when it was first announced. A card battle game set in the Marvel Universe from the developers of XCOM seemed like a stretch. The use of randomized cards in turn-based battles was also a major hang-up for us, and seemingly quite a few others given the game's lukewarm sales. However, what easily could have been a microtransaction-heavy gacha game turned out to be surprisingly fleshed out and added additional strategic depth to battles. Getting to know the many familiar heroes in between combat encounters and using the growth of those relationships to unlock further combat abilities makes the time between battles just as important, and thankfully all of our favorite heroes are well written and fleshed out. Would we have preferred an XCOM style Marvel game? Absolutely, but if Midnight Suns clicks with you, it's one of the best superhero outings in years.
We need to plan for what comes next.
What's next? Armageddon has already happened, Caretaker. What's next is hell.
Triang 2. We'll be featuring a lot of throwback games to scratch that nostalgic itch on our list, so just be prepared for that. Not every first-person shooter wants to be the next Call of Duty, and Triang 2 takes more inspiration from the Fear series than anything else, and honestly, we're here for it. The use of slow-mo during gunfights is top-notch, with all the classic bullets and blood exploding in gloriously gratuitous fashion that fills us with childish glee for the days before everything was hyper-realistic. The plot is as forgettable as you could imagine, but that's not what you're playing this game for. The real draw is the ballet of bullets, and the devs clearly had fun creating every single enemy encounter, and given the game's lightning-fast pace and the enemy's surprisingly competent AI, each playthrough can end up feeling like a brand new experience. Pacific Drive. There's no greater bond than between a driver, the road, and their vehicle, and no game embodies this idea more than Pacific Drive. Set against the backdrop of supernatural shenanigans in the Pacific Northwest, players need to traverse the many dangers of the exclusion zone and gather resources to upgrade their station wagon to go further into the zone for even better equipment and gear. The survival mechanics are deeply woven into the gameplay, and with your home base on wheels needing constant maintenance in addition to experiencing supernatural events that give your car a mind of its own, every trip into the zone is a new experience, turning this extraction survival sim into more of a roguelike. The background narrative revolving around the events that led to the zone are wonderfully incorporated into the world itself, and the deeper players go, the more they learn about the world. Still wakes the deep. There is truly no shortage of horror exploration games out there, but few, if any, are as immersive as Still Wakes the Deep. Set on an oil rig in the 1970s, everything about the rig is recreated with such impressive detail, you'd swear the developers had lived this life themselves. Full of interesting side characters, simply exploring the rig and getting to know your crew members is an experience itself. However, once the horror kicks in, it really kicks in. Drawing inspiration from Lovecraftian lore, the creatures the player attempts to escape from are truly spawned from the deepest of nightmares. The isolation and claustrophobia of being trapped in the middle of the ocean is palpable, and is arguably a terrifying experience all on its own. It's rare when all the elements of a horror experience come together this perfectly, and the game's relatively short length makes surviving this nightmare easily digestible in a single playthrough.
Medic! I'm right here! Archie, stop! Wait! Wait!
RoboCop Rogue City.
Guys, we've got company. Anyone expecting a silver freak?
Drop it, scum!
RoboCop has been around long enough that much of its future technology are now modern-day conveniences. But RoboCop remains a timeless icon much like the Terminator and has finally received a game deserving of his status. Putting players in the cybernetic boots of the one-man police squad, players will need to clean up the streets of old Detroit, and the decisions they make during the game's many missions can affect the overall outcome of the story, giving players far more agency over what easily could have been a traditional licensed shooter experience. Rogue City perfectly nails the aesthetic of the classic RoboCop films, and even got many series regulars to reprise their roles, including RoboCop himself, Peter Wellers. Fans of the films, or even just a good old first-person shooter experience, owe it to themselves to give this one a shot.
People who would do anything to be in your position, to have your abilities, and yet you attach yourself to something that is the weakest in you, to the part that's still human.
Evil West.
Oh, I'll be damned. That's a new way to spend taxpayers' money.
With every game these days chasing the uncanny valley, sometimes you just want a game focused on nothing more than the power fantasy of letting you loose to have a good time. A throwback to the PS2 era of third-person shooters, Evil West sets players on a quest to quell a supernatural uprising and gives you an obscene amount of steampunk and Tesla-inspired equipment to do it. A ridiculous premise full of clunky dialogue in the best ways, solid, impactful, and bloody combat, and some truly grotesque monster designs, Evil West knows exactly what it wants to be and wants nothing more than its players to have fun. Full of old-school combos and finishing moves, and a nice lean and linear campaign, Evil West is the blockbuster weekend rental of video games and the perfect nostalgic binge for players longing for the old-school days of gaming.
We need to be bigger than ever,
And smarter.
with better protocols.
And stronger lines of communication.
Well, it sounds like you two have it all under control. You've got my full support.
A Plague Tale Requiem.
You shouldn't have come.
You don't want to do this, believe me.
You talk too much.
A Plague Tale Innocence enraptured players in the emotional journey of Amicia and her brother Hugo as they navigated the Black Plague and the endless stream of highly infected and deadly rats. The sequel managed to build on this premise in every way imaginable. The stakes and the world are much bigger. The number of rats and dangers the pair encounter are somehow even more insurmountable, and the emotional bond between brother and sister remains core to the journey as Amicia learns to deal not only with Hugo's condition, but the rage building inside her. The gorgeous world remains both tragically beautiful and horrific as they travel the French countryside running from both the rats and the Inquisition, and combat has been greatly improved, providing players with more options during encounters, as well as more ways to approach the game stealthily. The entire series deserves far more recognition than it has received.
Your voice doesn't help.
Stop trying to be so tough. You might learn something.
Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown.
All hope rests with us, the Immortals, to rescue him and save the Empire.
The Prince of Persia franchise has been dormant for the better part of a decade now, and the planned remake of the Sands of Time's future ended up needing a rewind itself, but in the meantime, Ubisoft took a break from the Assassin's Creed machine to give players probably one of the best and most innovative Metroidvanias of the generation. While the game might be Prince of Persia in name alone, the puzzles, combat, and world are all wonderfully designed and crafted with their own unique visual style and aesthetic. Over the course of the game, the player will acquire numerous time-bending abilities that are well implemented into the gameplay and combat encounters, along with some truly impressive boss fights. The game arguably should have been a major hit with Metroidvania fans, but for whatever reason, the game disappeared from most players' radar as the year of major releases carried on. Returnal. It's not often a critically acclaimed Sony first-party game gets lost in the shuffle, but barely a year into the PS5, and Returnal kind of just came and went. Developed by Bullet Hell Maestro's Housemarque, the team adapted their perfected style of gameplay to the 3D space and wrapped it all together in a twisting, mind-bending time loop narrative that would have had Christopher Nolan checking the game's wiki for answers. Admittedly, the game's difficulty, as well as the fact there was no way to save mid-run at launch, was a strict barrier for entry, but that's honestly also the game's biggest draw. Not completing the game in a single playthrough, that was just ridiculous. The Souls-like difficulty mixed with roguelike elements keeps those dedicated enough coming back for just one more run, and the game's surprisingly deep and emotional narrative is more than enough for the rest to push through the game's difficulty spikes.
Astro received my signal. Then... that's it.
Which PS5 game do you feel deserves more attention from gamers? Share your picks in the comments. Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from MojoPlays, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.